The low hum of engines and the occasional clank of metal filled the small garage on the corner of a narrow street in San Francisco. Oil-stained floors, stacks of worn tires, and the faint smell of gasoline marked Adam's world, a place where he could blend into the mundane and unnoticed. At first glance, Adam was just a mechanic, his strong hands and broad shoulders suggesting years of hard work. His face, often shadowed by a worn cap, hid steely blue eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze. To the locals, he was a quiet man, rarely speaking beyond the words needed to get a job done. But beneath the grease-covered hands and the quiet demeanor, there was a darker truth that even Adam tried to forget. Years before, in another life, Adam had been someone else entirely. Known only as the Reaper, he was once one of the most feared assassins on the West Coast. His skills were legendary. Flawless precision, strategic planning, and a ruthless efficiency that left no trace. He could vanish from a scene as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving his employers in awe and his enemies in fear. But that life had cost him more than he'd anticipated. Friends, family, his peace of mind. Determined to escape the blood and violence, Adam had walked away, severing ties with the dark world he'd known for so long. The garage became his sanctuary, a place where he could disappear into ordinary life. But Adam's past was a shadow that refused to fade, especially with people like his cousin Marco still lurking in the background. Marco had been like a brother once, someone Adam had looked after from their teenage years. Back then, Adam had taken him under his wing, teaching him how to protect himself, how to navigate the streets without becoming prey. But Marco had taken a different path. While Adam sought to leave the criminal life, Marco had dived into it headfirst, aligning himself with gangsters and dealers, playing a dangerous game of power and betrayal. Adam had seen his cousin rise through the ranks of the city's underbelly, but he had chosen not to interfere, until he learned the truth. Unknown to Adam, Marco had become an informant, selling secrets to the highest bidder. In the underworld, he was known as an X9, a code word for snitch. Marco's loyalty was a commodity, something he traded for his own survival. And when the weight of his secrets threatened to crush him, he did the unthinkable. He sold Adam out to protect himself. Marco had whispered the tale of the Reaper to John Totti, a notorious Mafia boss known for his brutal methods and unyielding control. To Totti, the idea of capturing a ghost like the Reaper was tantalizing. But Marco had sweetened the deal further by casting suspicion away from himself, making Adam the target of Totti's retribution. It was a quiet Tuesday night when Adam's past came crashing back. He'd just closed the garage and was pulling down the heavy, rusted gate when he noticed them, 3 men standing in the shadows, watching him. He recognized the intent in their stances, the cold glint in their eyes. Adam's senses went on high alert, his muscles tensing, but before he could react, one of the men surged forward, delivering a hard blow to the back of his head. Darkness enveloped him. When he came to, Adam was in a damp, cramped space. His hands were bound tightly behind his back, and a blindfold pressed uncomfortably against his eyes. The sounds of dripping water and distant, muffled voices filled the room. As his senses slowly returned, Adam realized he was in some kind of basement, cold and reeking of mildew. He strained to listen, catching snippets of conversation from nearby. "Boss thinks he's just a mechanic," one voice muttered, laced with contempt. "Shouldn't be hard to get what we want out of him. Just a bit of persuasion." Another voice chuckled darkly. "Imagine if the boss knew the truth. This guy's no ordinary mechanic. He's family to Marco." The mention of Marco's name sent a rush of cold anger through Adam. His jaw clenched tightly as he pieced together the situation. Marco, his own cousin, the man he'd once protected, had used his name as a pawn, selling his life as a bargaining chip. Adam's blood boiled, but he forced himself to remain still, listening to every word, every sound. He needed to understand his captors, their routines, their weaknesses. Even in his bound state, Adam's mind was calculating, his senses razor-sharp from years of survival. The men continued their conversation, oblivious to the legend lying silently before them. They spoke of Marco's betrayal in nonchalant tones, unaware of the seething anger building within Adam. It was clear that Marco had told them little. They believed Adam was a mere bystander, a mechanic caught in a web of unfortunate circumstances. That mistake would be their undoing. Through the haze of pain, Adam absorbed every detail. He counted their steps, mapped the room in his mind, and noted the proximity of each voice. In his restrained silence, he found control. Every insult, every mention of Marco's treachery only fueled his resolve. He'd left his life as the Reaper to escape the violence, but these men had dragged him back. And if they thought he would go quietly, they were sorely mistaken. After what felt like hours, the basement fell silent, save for the occasional shuffle of footsteps as the guards changed shifts. Adam felt a trickle of blood from a wound on his forehead, but he paid it no mind. Instead, he focused on the quiet breathing of one of the guards nearby, a man whose voice had sounded hesitant, even uncertain. In the silence, Adam's instincts as the Reaper awakened, analyzing his captor's weaknesses with chilling precision. His thoughts drifted back to Marco. The betrayal stung like a fresh wound, the kind of pain that demanded retribution. Adam had walked away from his past, had tried to live a life free from death and betrayal. But now, as he lay bound and bleeding, a new resolve filled him. When the time came, he would show them all why the Reaper was more than a myth. And as for Marco, there would be no mercy. Adam drew a slow, deep breath, feeling the fire of vengeance ignite within him. He would wait, he would watch, and when the moment came, he would make them pay for every strike, every word, every betrayal. For now, he would be patient. But soon, very soon, the nightmare they had summoned would descend upon them. Adam's first sense upon waking was pain. Sharp, raw, radiating from his wrists to his shoulders as he hung from chains fastened above him. His ankles were also bound, forcing him into a painful, suspended position that made each breath a labor. He tried to push past the ache, to focus. Though his hands were restrained, his mind was as sharp as ever. He forced his breathing to steady, falling back on instincts he hadn't used in years. As the minutes dragged on, the door creaked open, and footsteps filled the small, dim room. The guards stepped closer, one of them carrying a metal bucket that he set down with a loud clang. Water sloshed against the edges. Adam clenched his jaw, refusing to let them see any flicker of weakness. "Well, look who's awake," a gruff voice sneered. Adam couldn't see through the blindfold, but he recognized the tone, a voice he'd been hearing on and off for hours. The man had a deep, gravelly accent that carried an undercurrent of cruelty. "Let's make this easy. You give us what we want, and this all ends. You know where Marco is hiding, don't you?" Adam's mouth felt dry, the taste of iron from a split lip lingering, but he kept his silence. He understood their mistake. These men saw only a mechanic, an expendable pawn. They didn't know he was the Reaper. After a few moments, he felt a fist slam into his gut, knocking the breath out of him. He wheezed but said nothing, focusing instead on counting the footsteps around him, piecing together the layout of the room. He had already started mapping their routines, committing to memory each voice, every inflection, and even the shifts in weight as they moved. Each detail was a potential advantage, a piece of his eventual escape. The days in captivity turned into a grueling routine of interrogation and torture. Each day, they would come to ask the same questions, to beat him and hurl insults. But Adam kept his responses to pained grunts, maintaining the image of a helpless civilian. Yet as they inflicted pain, Adam's mind stayed sharp, drinking in every detail about his surroundings. He noticed the low, continuous hum of an air vent on his left, the dampness of the floor suggesting a basement or underground location, and the metallic tang in the air that hinted at rusted pipes. On the second night, during a particularly brutal session, Adam noticed a shift in the guard's behavior. The younger guard, Ivan, seemed reluctant, his hands hovering nervously as the others beat Adam, his gaze flickering away. Adam sensed a chink in their armor. Ivan's hesitation could be useful. If he could plant seeds of doubt, Ivan might just be the key to his escape. After hours of blows and verbal assaults, they left him, but not before Adam made his first calculated move. With a strained, deliberate whisper, he called out, "Ivan." He knew the guards' names from the way they yelled them across the room. The young man froze, a hint of fear and pity in his stance as he turned back. Adam seized the moment, fixing a haunting, bloodshot stare in his direction. "You know, Marco betrayed you too," he muttered, his voice rasping with pain. Ivan looked at him, confusion etched in his features. Adam didn't elaborate. He let the words hang in the air, allowing Ivan's own curiosity and insecurity to start eating away at him. As Ivan left, Adam knew the seed had been planted. It was a risk, but he needed Ivan to doubt his loyalty to Toti. Over the next days, Adam continued this delicate manipulation, dropping cryptic hints about Marco and Toti's underhanded dealings whenever Ivan was within earshot. Slowly, he noticed a change in Ivan's demeanor. The young guard grew increasingly distracted, avoiding the other guard's eyes, as though he too harbored a secret. Adam's patience was paying off. The boy's paranoia was setting in, and Adam was stoking it carefully, giving him just enough to make him question everything. Ivan finally began to approach Adam cautiously, lingering by his side under the pretense of checking restraints. During one of these moments, Adam looked at him, catching his eye with a deadly seriousness. "They'll turn on you too, Ivan. Just like they did with me and Marco," he whispered. "You think you're safe with Toti? He'll make you take the fall when he needs a scapegoat." Ivan shifted uncomfortably, casting a quick glance over his shoulder before leaning in closer. "What do you know about Toti? You're just a mechanic. How could you know anything about this?" Adam gave him a cryptic smile, his lips cracked and bleeding, his voice barely audible. "Maybe Marco told me things you wouldn't believe." It was a gamble, but he saw the glimmer of uncertainty in Ivan's eyes. The young guard was in too deep, unable to step back, unable to resist the pull of Adam's words. The turning point came late one night after a particularly brutal session. Ivan returned to his post, watching over Adam with a mix of guilt and apprehension. Adam took a calculated breath, drawing on the last of his strength. "If you don't get out now, you'll end up like me, tied up and beaten," he whispered harshly. "I can help you, but you'll need to trust me." For a long moment, Ivan said nothing. Adam could feel his pulse pounding, every second stretched thin with anticipation. Finally, Ivan leaned in, his voice a near whisper. "What's the plan?" A surge of relief washed over Adam, though he kept his expression neutral. "Start small. Tonight, bring me a nail, anything sharp," he murmured. "Nothing big. Just something to loosen these bindings." The young guard nodded slightly, fear flickering across his face. Adam could tell that Ivan's desperation was outweighing his loyalty to Toti. This was his way out. As the heavy door closed behind Ivan, Adam felt the first stirrings of hope. His body ached, his wrists were raw, but his mind was clear. He now had an ally, however fragile. The foundation of his escape was laid, and his plan was beginning to take shape. He would continue to plant doubt, foster chaos among the guards, and eventually, when the time was right, make his move. And once he was free, there would be no mercy. Not for the guards, not for Toti, and certainly not for Marco. The Reaper was stirring, and soon, he would bring his vengeance to bear on every soul who had a hand in this betrayal. The days crawled by in a haze of darkness and cold. Adam's body bore fresh bruises and cuts from his interrogators, but beneath the bruised exterior, his mind was more alert than ever. He was waiting, watching as his plan began to take root. Ivan's loyalty to Toti was crumbling, and Adam was there to push him toward betrayal, to make him feel that switching sides was not only wise but his only option. One evening, as Adam hung in the half-lit basement, he heard the familiar shuffle of boots. Then the door creaked open, and Ivan slipped inside. He moved cautiously, his eyes darting to ensure he wasn't being watched, before revealing a small, jagged nail palmed in his hand. He quickly handed it to Adam, who hid it skillfully within his fingers. "Don't make me regret this," Ivan muttered, his voice barely a whisper, avoiding Adam's intense gaze. "You're doing the right thing," Adam replied softly, adding a hint of gratefulness to his tone. "One day, you'll realize how important this choice was." With a final glance, Ivan left, locking the door behind him. Adam immediately set to work, using the nail to scratch away at the rope bindings on his wrists. Every small grind against the rope gave him a sliver of hope, each stroke bringing him closer to freedom. But he knew better than to rush. For now, he had to focus on breaking his enemies from within, to weaken their foundation before making his escape. Over the next few days, Adam subtly turned Ivan's suspicions into full-fledged paranoia. He sowed doubts with whispers and nods, making cryptic comments about other guards and hinting that they might be spies, informants, or simply eager to betray Toti if given the chance. Ivan's anxious glances at his fellow guards became more frequent, and Adam noticed with satisfaction the uneasy stares between the men as they worked, each one wondering if the others harbored secrets. Finally, one afternoon, Adam took a calculated risk. During a guard rotation, he mentioned to Ivan, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, that he'd overheard Marco himself talking about Ivan. "Marco told Toti you'd flip, given the chance," Adam said, feigning a hesitant tone. "You think they'd keep you alive if they knew?" Ivan stiffened, his face paling. "You're lying. Believe what you want. But ask yourself why you've been treated differently, why they keep you down here with me instead of letting you take the easier shifts," Adam replied coolly. "Marco has his ways of protecting himself." The suggestion was simple but effective. Adam watched as Ivan's expression twisted with suspicion, his mind visibly racing as he considered every conversation, every odd look from his fellow guards. Adam knew that once the seed of doubt was planted, it would grow into a thorny bush, prickling Ivan's thoughts until he could no longer trust anyone around him. A day later, Adam's plan erupted into full chaos. The guards had changed shifts when a loud argument broke out between Ivan and one of the older guards, a hard-eyed man named Louis. Adam could hear them from down the hall, their voices rising as they accused each other of betrayal, each one suspicious of the other's intentions. Adam listened, his heart pounding with anticipation. The tension he'd created was finally bubbling over. "You think I don't see you talking to him all the time?" Louis's voice echoed down the hallway. "What's he got on you, huh? Is he paying you off? Don't pretend you're clean, Louis. I know you're the one who met with the cops last month." Ivan shot back, his voice cracking under the weight of his own fear. The confrontation escalated quickly, the yelling turning to shoving, and then a sharp crack echoed as one of them struck the other. The sound was followed by a clamor of scuffling feet as the guards raced toward the commotion to pull them apart. In the chaotic moments that followed, Adam felt a surge of exhilaration. It was time. With the nail he'd been working on for days, Adam finally snapped the last fiber of his wrist binding. Pain lanced through his stiff hands as he worked the rope off his wrists and quietly freed his legs. Every second counted. He knew he had to act fast. He slipped out of the dim room, creeping into the hallway where Ivan and Louis were still yelling at each other, surrounded by other guards trying to break up the fight. In the commotion, no one noticed Adam as he snatched a small handgun from a nearby table and tucked it against his hip. His pulse pounded in his ears as he moved through the shadows, blending into the frenzy that he had orchestrated. Adam's mind was a calculated storm as he moved. He had no intentions of slipping away quietly. If he escaped now, they'd pursue him. No, he was going to dismantle Toti's entire operation from the inside. With his newfound weapon, Adam moved with purpose, catching a guard unaware and disabling him with a swift strike, taking a key card from his belt. He crept through the maze of corridors until he reached the central monitoring room, where a lone guard was half asleep at his post. Adam slipped behind him, one hand over the man's mouth as he quietly subdued him. Adam quickly scanned the monitors, taking in the layout of the building and the location of each guard. But something caught his eye on the monitor feed, a familiar figure descending the staircase. John Totti himself, flanked by more guards. Totti's presence confirmed one thing: the Mafia boss wanted to handle Adam personally. It was exactly what Adam had hoped for. Totti's arrival meant he was here to assess the chaos himself, unaware that his legendary assassin was already loose within his own hideout. Adam's lips curved into a dark smile as he slipped back into the hall, gripping the handgun tighter. He kept close to the shadows, avoiding detection, moving with deadly precision toward Totti's entourage. The guards were scattered, preoccupied with the chaos that Adam's machinations had created. The tension in the hideout was now a living thing, crackling in the air as guards exchanged wary glances, unsure who to trust. Adam waited patiently in the darkness, his finger on the trigger as Totti and his men approached. This was the culmination of days of agony, of whispered manipulation and silent suffering. The Reaper had returned, and he was ready to unleash vengeance on every last one of them. As Totti drew closer, Adam made his move, stepping out of the shadows with the silent precision of a predator. The first guard didn't even see him coming before he dropped to the floor. Another turned in time to see Adam's cold gaze before he too fell, leaving Totti standing alone, facing the man he thought he had broken. "Hello, Totti," Adam said, his voice low and menacing. The sight of his former assassin standing there, poised and deadly, sent a flicker of fear across Totti's face. But Adam had no intention of showing mercy. The time had come to dismantle everything, starting with a man who dared to think he could contain the Reaper. The air was thick with tension as Adam stood face to face with John Totti, the infamous Mafia boss who had orchestrated his capture. The dim, cold basement suddenly felt charged, the silence amplified by the sight of Adam, free and armed, standing against the very man who thought he had him beaten. Totti's guards, already rattled from Adam's carefully planted paranoia, now seemed paralyzed, unsure whether to defend their boss or retreat from the force of nature that was the Reaper. "You thought you could keep me down here?" Adam's voice was low and filled with the calm of deadly intent. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Totti's face barely twitched, though his eyes flickered with something close to fear. But in the practiced arrogance of a crime lord, he lifted his chin, giving Adam a disdainful glare. "You're just a mechanic. You had your shot at a normal life, but your past came back to haunt you. All I did was offer you a place." Adam's expression hardened, his fingers tightening on the gun. "A place? You know nothing about my past, Totti. You only know the legend. And you thought you could use it to your advantage. But here's the truth. You've just given me a reason to come back." A flicker of panic crossed Totti's face, but he quickly recovered, sneering at Adam. "Even if you take me out, my men will tear you to pieces." But as he looked around, Totti's confidence faltered. His guards exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalty visibly eroding in the face of the unstoppable force that was the Reaper. Adam watched the shift with satisfaction. The seeds of doubt he'd sown in Ivan had taken root, spreading like wildfire through the ranks. The guards who had once been ruthless followers of Totti were now eyeing each other with suspicion, wondering if betrayal lurked in every shadow. Just then, the door to the basement flew open, and Louis, the veteran guard who had clashed with Ivan, burst in, his face red with rage and fear. In his hand, he held a folder. "Boss," he shouted, his voice trembling. You need to see this." Totti turned sharply, snatching the folder from Louis's hand. He opened it, his face growing paler with each page he read. It was a dossier. Notes, surveillance photos, and details about the Reaper's past, Adam's former life. Totti's eyes flicked between the dossier and Adam, and the realization dawned. The man standing before him wasn't just a mechanic. He was the Reaper, the assassin who had been whispered about in fear for years. A hush fell over the room as the guards began to realize who Adam truly was. Those who had mocked and tortured him moments before now looked at him as if he were a vengeful spirit. They edged back, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Louis, still panting, stared at Totti. You kept us in the dark about him, didn't you? He demanded. You told us he was just a bargaining chip, some pawn. But he's the damn Reaper. The room tensed further, every guard suddenly wondering if they had enough bullets or courage to take on a man of Adam's caliber. The panic in their eyes was palpable, and Adam could feel it feeding into the chaos he had so carefully nurtured. Ivan, caught in the middle of this revelation, looked horrified, his eyes darting between Adam and Toti, as though trying to understand what he had helped unleash. Adam met his gaze, nodding slightly as if to remind him of their silent alliance. But now Ivan, too, was starting to doubt his choices. Toti, seeing his control slip further by the second, shouted to his men, "Stand your ground. He's just one man. Do you think he can take us all on?" But even as he barked his orders, Toti's voice held a note of desperation, and his men hesitated, glancing at each other in silent mutiny. Adam took advantage of the split second of confusion, aiming his gun at one of the guards still loyal to Toti and firing without hesitation. The man dropped, and his fellow guards recoiled, some backing away in fear. In that instant, chaos erupted. Several guards, realizing they were outmatched, scrambled for the door, shoving each other aside in their panic to escape. Others, loyal to Toti, raised their weapons, only to hesitate as they looked into the cold, unyielding eyes of the Reaper. Adam moved through them with lethal grace, each step a calculated decision as he disabled guard after guard with precision. The basement transformed into a scene of utter pandemonium. Ivan, in a final desperate attempt to save himself, called out to Adam, "I helped you. You don't need to kill me." Adam paused, the silence heavy as he looked into Ivan's wide, fearful eyes. For a brief moment, Adam's cold gaze softened. "I keep my promises," he said simply. "But get out now if you want to live." With a nod of gratitude, Ivan stumbled backward, retreating through the basement door, disappearing into the night. The last remnants of the guards who had stayed loyal to Toti now faced Adam alone, and the weight of their own choices settled over them like a shroud. Adam wasted no time, his focus singular as he moved toward Toti. Toti, now visibly trembling, tried to back away, his bravado shattered. "Think about this, Adam. We could have worked together. I could have offered you power, money, anything you wanted." Adam shook his head slowly. "All I wanted was peace, Toti. But you brought me back to this," he said, gesturing to the chaos around them. "And now, I'm going to make sure you never hurt anyone again." Toti stumbled, tripping over his own feet as he tried to retreat, desperation etched across his face. He lunged for a gun on a nearby table, but Adam was faster. In one swift motion, he disarmed Toti, twisting his arm back until the Mafia boss fell to his knees, crying out in pain. "Please," Toti whispered, his voice trembling, his defiance gone. "You don't have to do this." Adam leaned in close, his voice cold and steady. "Maybe not. But for all the people you've hurt, for the lives you've destroyed, including mine, I choose to." With one final look of quiet rage, Adam tightened his grip, and Toti's last desperate breath echoed through the basement. Silence fell as Adam let the Mafia boss drop, his life snuffed out in a single decisive act. Adam straightened, the weight of his own actions settling over him. The Reaper had returned, but it was not out of lust for blood or vengeance. It was for freedom, a clean break from the shadows that had followed him for years. And now, with Toti and his empire shattered, he had finally severed the chains binding him to his past. He surveyed the room, littered with the remains of the Mafia's loyal guards. The basement was a monument to a past life, a place he would leave behind as he walked toward the freedom he had fought so hard to reclaim. With a final glance, Adam turned, vanishing into the shadows of the night, leaving only whispers of the Reaper's return echoing in the darkness. Adam slipped through the narrow corridors of the hideout, moving with lethal grace. The silence after Toti's demise was almost surreal, a momentary lull before the storm. Adam knew he didn't have long. Word of Toti's death would spread quickly, and the remnants of the Mafia would soon come for vengeance. He was prepared for it. In fact, he welcomed it. His fingers grazed the pistol he had taken from one of the fallen guards, its cold weight a reminder of what was still to come. His instincts were fully alive now, his senses honed to every creak, every shift in the air. It was as if he had never left this life, as though the years spent as a mechanic had been a mere pause. The Reaper had returned, and tonight there would be no turning back. Just as he reached the exit corridor, the roar of approaching engines echoed through the underground. Multiple vehicles screeched to a halt outside, and the metallic clang of car doors slamming open told him reinforcements had arrived. Toti's inner circle had come, and they were out for blood. Adam's grip tightened on his weapon. He could see the figures moving into position outside through a narrow window, their shadows long and dark against the dim lights of the hideout's entrance. Taking a steadying breath, he darted back down the hall, slipping into a side room filled with crates and scattered ammunition. Toti's armory, it seemed. He quickly reloaded his pistol and stuffed extra magazines into his pockets. He knew he'd need them. As he moved, his mind raced, mapping every inch of the hideout, calculating his next steps. There was no room for error. Suddenly, the door to the hideout burst open, and the sound of heavy boots thundered through the hallways. Adam counted at least 8 men from the echo of their footsteps, heavily armed and speaking in low, tense tones. They split up, moving through the corridors with military precision, checking each room. These weren't the usual thugs. These were Toti's elite, men trained for exactly this kind of situation. A bitter smile touched Adam's lips. He almost pitied them. He waited, his heartbeat steady, as 2 of the men approached the armory door. The first one entered, his flashlight sweeping the room. Adam moved like a shadow, slipping behind the man and disarming him in a swift, silent motion. Before the second guard could react, Adam fired a single shot, dropping him instantly. The silence that followed was thick, each fallen body a reminder of how deadly he was when pushed to his limits. Adam moved quickly, retrieving one of their assault rifles and shouldering it. He slipped back into the hallway, his every step deliberate, his every breath controlled. He moved through the hideout, taking down each man with calculated precision, leaving behind a trail of shadows and silence. The guards barely had time to react, each one of them falling before they could even raise their weapons. But then, as he rounded a corner, Adam heard the echo of rapid footsteps. The reinforcements had regrouped, and from the distant shouts and heavy footsteps, he knew they were closing in fast, cutting off his escape routes. He was outnumbered, but the odds didn't faze him. His mind was already racing through options, and his eyes caught sight of the central stairwell that led to the upper levels. Moving swiftly, he ascended the stairs, knowing he needed the higher ground to turn the tide. The upper floor was a labyrinth of offices and storage rooms, the kind of place he could use to his advantage. He slipped into a darkened room, positioning himself behind a heavy desk, his rifle aimed at the entrance. He listened, his sharp senses catching the faint sound of footsteps as the remaining guards moved closer, their voices growing louder. A few seconds later, 2 men entered the room, their guns raised, sweeping the area. Adam held his breath, his gaze steady. As the first man moved past the doorway, Adam fired a precise shot, catching him in the shoulder. The man fell, clutching his wound with a scream as his partner spun around, gun aimed directly at Adam. In that split second, Adam ducked low, rolling out of the line of fire as bullets ripped through the desk he'd been using as cover. Without missing a beat, he came up from his crouch, firing a burst that sent the second guard crashing back against the wall. The firefight had been quick and brutal, but Adam knew that the noise would attract the remaining reinforcements. He moved swiftly through the hallway, slipping back into the maze of rooms, leaving them with only faint echoes of his movement. But as he made his way toward the far exit, a figure stepped into his path. Adam recognized him instantly. It was Luca, Toti's right-hand man, a towering figure known for his cold efficiency and brutal tactics. Luca's face was twisted with rage, his jaw clenched as he raised a semi-automatic rifle, his eyes locking onto Adam with deadly focus. "Reaper," Luca sneered, his voice a growl of contempt. "You really thought you could kill the boss and walk out of here?" Adam's gaze remained steady. "I didn't plan on walking out. But I don't mind taking you with me." Luca's grin was a feral thing, and he lunged forward, firing as he moved. Adam darted to the side, bullets slamming into the wall behind him. He took cover behind a pillar, reloading his weapon with practiced speed. Luca advanced, his footsteps echoing as he stalked forward, his voice taunting. "I heard about you, Reaper. You were a legend. But legends die too." Adam waited, counting Luca's steps, timing his breaths. And then, in a single fluid motion, he stepped out from behind the pillar, raising his rifle and firing a precise 3-round burst. The shots tore into Luca's leg and chest, sending him staggering back. But Luca, stubborn and filled with fury, remained on his feet, blood soaking through his shirt as he raised his weapon, firing a wild spray of bullets. Adam rolled to the side, the shots barely missing him. He aimed carefully, firing a final shot that hit Luca squarely, sending him crashing to the floor, his weapon clattering from his hand. Adam approached slowly, standing over Luca's gasping form, the last vestiges of life fading from his eyes. "You should have stayed away, Luca," Adam said, his voice barely above a whisper. Luca's eyes widened in a mix of fury and fear as the world went dark. The sounds of silence returned, broken only by the faint hum of machinery and the distant thud of Adam's footsteps as he continued his exit. He had eliminated nearly every last man standing between him and freedom. As he reached the exit, Adam paused, turning back to look at the ruins of the hideout. He took in the silence, the heavy stillness of the aftermath. His work here was done. There would be no more threats, no more ghosts haunting his life. With one last look, Adam stepped out into the night, the weight of the final confrontation lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he felt the beginning of true freedom. Adam emerged from the hideout into the cold night air of San Francisco, breathing in the freedom that he had fought so brutally to reclaim. The echoes of gunfire still rang in his ears, each step a reminder of the blood and violence he had just left behind. The streets were eerily quiet, illuminated by the dim glow of streetlights that cast long shadows across the city. But he knew he couldn't relax just yet. There was one final loose end to tie. Adam had one last stop before he could truly leave his past behind. Marco. The man who had once been like a brother had now become his greatest enemy, the one who had orchestrated his betrayal and left him to the wolves. Adam's jaw tightened as he thought about it. This wasn't just about vengeance, it was about closure. He knew Marco's usual haunts, the dark corners of the city where the desperate and the dangerous thrived. An hour later, Adam found himself outside a run-down bar on the edge of the Tenderloin district. The building was shabby and dimly lit, with flickering neon lights that barely illuminated the cracked windows. Adam could feel the pulse of the music through the walls, the deep bass beats vibrating against his skin. He took a steadying breath, checking the pistol at his side. This was it. Inside, the bar was packed with shadows, figures hunched over tables, leaning into whispered conversations. In a dark booth toward the back, Adam spotted Marco. He looked thinner, his hair disheveled, his eyes darting with a nervous energy. Marco was a man on the run, always watching his back, haunted by his own lies and betrayals. As Adam approached, Marco looked up, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized his cousin. Fear twisted across his face as he straightened, glancing around as though searching for an escape route. But Adam's presence seemed to paralyze him. "Adam." Marco's voice was barely a whisper, thick with dread. I didn't think." Adam sat across from him, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Didn't think I'd survive? Didn't think I'd come back for you?" He leaned in, his voice cold. "I warned you about this, Marco. About what would happen if you crossed me." Marco swallowed hard, his hands trembling as he gripped his glass. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he stammered. I had no choice, Adam. They would have killed me if I didn't give them someone." Adam's jaw clenched. "So you sold me out to save yourself. The Reaper, your own blood, handed over like a pawn." The desperation in Marco's face deepened, his eyes wide as he tried to find the words to defend himself. "I didn't want it to go this far, Adam. I thought Toti would let you live, that he'd see you as an asset." "You thought wrong," Adam replied, his voice low and dangerous. "I was tortured, nearly killed because of you. You sold me out to save yourself, and now there's no one left to protect you." For a moment, Marco's face contorted with fury. "You think you're so righteous, Adam? You're not innocent. I didn't force you to become the Reaper. You chose that life." Adam's eyes hardened. "I chose to protect you, to protect our family. And you used me, betrayed me. All for what, Marco? Power? Money?" Marco looked away, shame flickering in his eyes. His voice softened, a tinge of regret creeping in. "I didn't know what else to do. I was in too deep. I thought I could control it, that I could survive if I just played my cards right." Adam's expression didn't change. "You thought wrong. Now, you'll live with the consequences." For a long, heavy moment, silence fell between them, Marco's shoulders slumping as he realized the full weight of what he had done. Adam watched him, the cousin who had once been a brother, now a stranger whose greed and cowardice had led them both down a path of ruin. Part of Adam wanted to end it right here, to deliver the same cold justice he had dealt to Toti. But there was something else pulling at him, a whisper of the person he had once been before the Reaper consumed him. "Leave the city, Marco," Adam said finally, his voice soft but firm. "Disappear. If I see you here again, if I hear your name, I won't be so merciful." Marco looked up, relief mingling with surprise. "Why, you're letting me go?" Adam's gaze was ice-cold. "I'm giving you a chance to live. But make no mistake, if you betray me again, you'll wish you hadn't." Marco nodded frantically, scrambling to his feet, nearly tripping over his own legs as he stumbled toward the door. Adam watched him go, feeling a strange sense of finality settle over him. The man who had betrayed him was no longer his responsibility. He was a ghost, a memory to be buried with the life Adam was leaving behind. As Marco disappeared into the night, Adam felt the weight lifting from his shoulders. The past had finally been severed, every tie to the Reaper cut loose. He stepped out into the cold night, breathing in the crisp air, feeling a freedom he hadn't known in years. The sounds of the city surrounded him, the distant wail of a siren, the hum of traffic, the soft murmur of voices drifting from open windows. For the first time in a long time, Adam felt a calm that he had nearly forgotten. There would be no more shadows lurking over him, no more debts to pay, no more ghosts from a life he no longer wanted. As he walked away from the bar, Adam let the memories of the Reaper fall away, each step a declaration that he was done with that life. The city stretched out before him, filled with possibility and the promise of a new beginning. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: he was free. The dawn was just beginning to break, casting a soft light over the streets of San Francisco. Adam's silhouette disappeared into the morning mist, the man who had once been the Reaper finally at peace.